If you are a business owner, public figure, or in high level of leadership, and you want to curate an abundant, balanced life by uncovering the blocks that stand in your way and tune into your own wisdom, you are in the right place. In this podcast, we talk about personal and professional tools and strategies so that you can elevate your potential, expand your impact, and enjoy your life. I'm your host, Angela Williams. I'm a licensed therapist, coach, guide, speaker, educator, avid beachgoer, and I've helped thousands of clients achieve personal growth and transformation. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the show. Today we have a very special guest. This is my friend, Zach. Zach, we've been connected for a really long time. I'm so glad to have you on the show now today. Zach is a licensed mental health counselor. He completed an undergraduate degree in social studies education in Texas before continuing his master's in mental health counseling at Webster University in Geneva, Switzerland. Zach's philosophy was heavily influenced by Carl Jung in Switzerland. Zach has experience helping people work through many difficult issues, but he has most of his experience and training in the areas of trauma, PTSD, anxiety, stress, HIV/AIDS, ADHD, and other addictions. Most of Zach's experience comes from working in the areas of trauma from both sexual abuse and assault, as well as military-related PTSD. Zach mostly works with adults, but often sees children for ADHD. Zach also enjoys working with couples on family-related stress. An interesting fact is his traveling experience. He loves traveling and views himself as a third culture kid due to how much he moved as a child. Welcome, Zach.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here too. I think this is wonderful.
I want you to talk about how you're living your bigger, braver life because I learned some new things about you just reading your bio, and that's so funny because that's happened to me with other guests that I know for a while too.
Well, I mean, just the definition. Most people don't even know the definition of a third culture kid because it's very niche. Generally speaking, it's when parents have one culture and they raise a kid in a separate culture, and then that kid develops a third culture.
Okay.
And so most of that I attribute to as a kid. I grew up in, and the predominant culture was Haitian. And so get these like this very white family living in rural Haiti, which absolutely changed my development and my values. Then I just kind of took that idea about traveling to a new extent whenever I became an adult. I think that I've lived, not just like been to, but I've lived on 5 continents, and the 2 that I have not lived on, I have not even been to. But yeah, I just thought this is a great lifestyle for me, especially as a young adult. I was like, I'm going to find a job to where I can work in Australia.
Yeah.
And then I moved there and found a job and kind of figured it out.
Love it. What was your favorite place to live and why?
Most of them have some sort of lesson for me that I can't, that put them high on that list. But I really enjoyed living in rural China. I lived in a very, very small city that's about twice the size of Orlando.
Okay.
On Chinese standards of big cities, called Jinzhou.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a magnificent, life-changing experience. Well, I say that's my favorite.
Yeah. What made it so life-changing, would you say?
I was living in a monastery and I was doing a lot of formal education and training in Zen Buddhism. It was like right next to the Three Gorges, and it's some of the most beautiful landscape.
Yeah, I bet. Wow. I've not made it over there at this point, but from everything I see and hear, it's amazing.
And anybody that's thinking about traveling to China, I think the big city is one thing, but then the rural areas outside of the big city, especially like central China, the country is a lot like ours, where if somebody just goes to New York because they want to have the American experience that they didn't have, I would encourage somebody that wanted to visit the US to go to Sedona and the Grand Canyon and like our national parks and stuff like that. And China has some really beautiful places like that.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that. So tell us a little bit more. So for everybody listening and watching, I met Zach. We were both in the field of mental health. And so we made a connection a long time ago through that way. And we're both local to each other. So tell us, Zachary, what's your bigger vision for you in this world? And how are you doing that? How are you living that out today?
One of the things that I was brought up with is my dad would always say this thing where he'd say, if you see a problem, you become responsible for its solution. And that has developed some unhealthy habits, but it's also one of the big things is that I get frustrated with is how we do mental health in this country.
Mhm.
In my experience with insurances and all of the things that big mental health takes advantage of as far as therapists
Yeah.
is quite frustrating, especially when it comes to access to mental health from our socioeconomic perspectives. And so I started the practice in Switzerland, and at the time they didn't have this space of therapists.
Yeah.
You could be a psychoanalyst or a psychologist, but counselor wasn't really a thing.
Okay,
And
so for
so
those listening, because I think a lot of people outside of our field are confused on the differences of those. Can you break those down?
So generally speaking, very general, is psychologists are more trained in research. Even though it's psychology, it's the training is a lot more like sociology than a mental health counselor, or how we break it down in Florida is marriage and family social workers and mental health counselors are all under one board.
Mhm.
So when I say like mental health practitioner, what I mean is all three of those licenses or license tracks. And the goal of the education for those three is more the treatment of mental health,
Mhm.
where a psychologist is in the treatment of like broader, bigger things. Because you can also become a psychologist, and then a psychoanalyst is somebody that has studied at a specific psychoanalytic school, like Jungian, Freudian, the Adler school that we have here in the
Mhm.
States. And so they take that one theoretical orientation and then they apply it to the treatment of patients. And there's a big gap there in Switzerland. So me and a business partner started a practice,
Mhm.
tried to do it there. The housing crisis that caused a whole bunch of countries to tighten up their laws to give jobs to their citizens made it so that I needed to come back. And I was like, I'll take a stop in Florida. And I personally built the practice here in Florida.
Mhm.
Business partner went back to Germany, and that was 2009. And it started. So the bigger picture for me is it started off with saying, I want to be a therapist. And the more I got into it, the more I got frustrated with, well, there's this boundary to care, and there's this boundary to care, and there's this boundary. And
Yeah.
then it turned into group practice, probably is when it really started picking up.
Mhm.
And then it turned into me helping other people start group practices in like 20, and with a focus on a spectrum of therapists. I don't want to just LMHCs,
Mhm.
or I want everybody to be there so that in the practice, everybody has their own look at
Approach.
mental. And then that got into, well, we can do this, but what happens to the client that can pay, go over a budget, and they can only pay $19 per session? So I also wanted different levels of therapists. So the most experienced therapist, then the therapist that is just licensed, therapists that are registered interns, which is like the equivalent of our residents. And then I also have traditionally taken on grad interns as well. I can't afford to take on, 15 clients at $19 a
Right.
session without
Right.
insurance.
So I love
So
that you offer, yeah, that sliding fee scale or that access. That's a very important piece. And I want to hear more too, because you're very big picture focused from my perspective of being able to set up systems and make those work for other people. That's not a skill set that everyone has. And obviously that's why they come to you. So I want to hear more about the business side of things and how you structure it for yourself that you're not burned out, that you're kind of able to bring more ease as an entrepreneur. And we're saying this with a smile because,
right.
there's ebbs and flows and there's seasons and all these great things. I just want to hear it more from you on the business end of how you're structuring that as an entrepreneur as well.
As far as burnout, I don't know much about that. I wax and wane
Yeah.
on a regular basis of saying I need to set better boundaries for myself.
Mhm.
But I think that the biggest thing is that I have a lot of fun doing this. And HD Counseling is the business. And HD Counseling now is the largest single owner practice
Mhm.
in Florida and the second largest in the United States.
Yeah. That's
Um,
such an amazing feat. Congrats.
Thanks. But like there's a lot of meaning and purpose that comes through being able to do something like that. So that's probably the biggest way that I stave off the effects of burnout, but it's gonna get me at some point.
Are you a high achieving female leader ready to break through your success ceiling?
I would love to invite you to join the Aligned Leader Circle, a warm, welcoming space where ambitious and smart female leaders come together to grow. This isn't just about developing your leadership skills, it's about aligning your mindset, emotions, and body wisdom so you can lead with greater ease and purpose. In this exclusive community, you'll experience real transformations, gain deep self awareness, and connect with women who are committed to thriving. If you're ready to go beyond your limits in a safe, collaborative environment, visit angelamarie.co/individuals to join us at Founders Rates for a limited time only. Now, back to the show.
Well, and I think that's a really good point. I just want to stop here for a second because this is what I talk to a lot of with my therapy clients and my coaching clients is how do we practice self-care, success, stress management, stress reduction? One of the important things for me is how do we keep those boundaries when we have such a big heart, we have such a big vision, and we want to really make a big impact in this world. And you are doing that, right? With your reach, like your ripple impact. And that's how I define it as my mission. I help people so they can expand their ripple impact. And so
Right.
your ripple impact is so far reaching. And I hope that you remind yourself of that regularly because that's truly a gift. But I think that's something we talk about regularly. And again, I come from a place of we're not strangers to hard work. Obviously, we've taken nothing and turned it into something when we're looking at what we're doing in this world, and that not everybody has the capacity or ability to
Absolutely.
do. And so what I think the point though
Yeah.
that I'm coming back to is that you saying your love for this really helps to mitigate some of that stress and some of that burnout. And I think that's a really big piece. Another piece of my brain soul framework that I do use with my clients talks about alignment. And that is what you're
Yep.
about, is being in the right place and doing the right things. Obviously, we can do more work on tightening up the boundaries and communication and bringing more of that ease, more delegation. There's always areas for that. But I think
Yeah.
that's a really important piece that you touched on. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's there's a couple prongs to that. Is like the first one is like the mental health side of things and my actual treatment of clients. And I have been lucky enough to niche well enough. The stuff that I talk about on a daily basis is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love trauma work
Yeah.
and I love being the guy that a lot of other clinicians, and that's where my private practice is right now.
Yeah.
A lot of other clinicians are like, I don't know what to do with this patient anymore. They'll refer that patient to me, not just in the office, but in our community. And so that is educational, it's fun, it's informative to my own traumas, and I have a lot of fun with that.
Some
Yeah.
people might be listening to this and thinking, fun with trauma, like what's your deal? But honestly, as another clinician who works with trauma, like we can have fun in these sessions. So if you are afraid to go, or if you haven't had the best experience with a therapist, please find someone who is a good fit because we have fun too. We laugh, we cry. There's a lot going on in our sessions and it's okay.
And it's so fulfilling. So the fun of it is also like fulfilling, maybe. It's when that client comes in and they're like, I haven't told anybody about this trauma that I had for 30 years. And then 6 months to a year later, they're like, I've never been able to function like this before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's always been so debilitating that there's nothing that's more fulfilling for me
Yeah.
than that.
I view it as
Yeah,
such a beautiful gift and an honor to be able to help facilitate in
absolutely.
that process. Like it is one of the coolest things ever. Yeah, I'm in agreement with you.
And then I do a lot of work with registered interns and grad interns and teaching them methods that are effective, and then seeing them being able to do that same thing is also so fulfilling.
Absolutely.
With side note is my frustration with trauma work in our community really stems from my work with pulse survivors.
Mm.
And if anybody doesn't know what that is, there was a shooting in Orlando that was a hate crime, and
That was a
we
few
talk
years ago
about
now, right?
2016.
Wow.
I
Wow.
know, and like I was seeing patients that were coming in to see me after having seen somebody else that said that they were trauma informed, but they weren't really trauma informed. And then if they were trained in a special technique, they're being overly rigid with the application of that technique
Yeah.
in a way that I think that technique was not designed to be presented that way.
Yeah.
It was designed to be a tool for the clinician, not a
rigid
a
stand. I agree with you. I think, that's another thing that I see too is clients will come to me after they've seen other therapists and they'll be
yeah,
like, whoa, wait, what? And I do think that there is a lack of thorough trauma training that needs to happen in the school system, even. I don't think I
everywhere.
truly, is that a word, delved into
I'll
um,
accept it.
yeah,
I think it
trauma
is.
education until I went and got that full training on EMDR. So using that technique. But before that, I don't remember really having that full education in school. And that is a huge detriment to our mental health professionals.
Well, I define trauma as the forced ripping away of an identity. And the higher we have an attachment to that identity,
Mhm.
the more traumatic it's going to be when
Mm.
it's taken away from us.
That's a
Um,
beautiful way to put that. And now that I'm thinking of this, side note, and I'll be talking about this more in future sessions, but when I gave birth to my son, it was very traumatic for many reasons. I had postpartum depression, anxiety, like it was just a full shebang of stuff. And you saying that, like what a great way to describe what was happening.
yeah, and it opens up that experience to so many other like areas.
Yeah.
You lose a job,
Yeah.
a family member passes away,
Mhm.
like a parent passes away. Oh, now it feels like I'm no longer a child.
Yeah.
Like I'm not that person's kid anymore. Like I don't have a parent anymore. But same thing for me. In birth, my kid died. He came out like purple.
Hmm.
I think if I remember correctly, it was like 29 stitches that were put in order to get him out. Because it got to the point of like in the birth canal to where he was no longer fully sustained on
Mhm.
mom,
Yeah.
but he wasn't able to breathe yet. And so he suffocated. And he was in the ICU, the NICU, and we were in the hospital for days just making sure that he was okay. He's fine. They're so
That's the
resilient.
scariest. I mean, it's like you can't even describe.
But my identity was like, I'm getting ready to be this beautiful dad that everybody talks about. It's all wonderful and it's going to
Right.
be all great. And then all of a sudden, the birthing plan went out the window.
Right.
I'm sitting here just like in the room, like, what do I do? I don't have
Yeah.
any control over anything.
Yeah.
Their sirens are going off. They're like, code
Yeah.
blue, all over the speakers in the hospital. And then they brought in like a trauma thing. And I'm just like, what do I do?
Right.
And it was a forced stripping away of identity. So, I mean, that is the key that I want to empower like my registered interns to do is say like when you find that identity that part of the client
I love IFS too. And IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. I also will be talking about that in a future podcast session too. But if for folks listening and watching who want to take a look,
great.
definitely search it. There is a really great book called Introduction to Family Systems. It's so easy to read and it's such a helpful eye-opening.
I love that book
Yeah.
too. I'd also put in there with it no bad parts. When we find that part of us that was traumatized because it was all gung ho to play a bigger role in our life, and then that part's just like, nope,
Yeah.
addressing that as far as the
Mhm.
trauma rather than just the symptoms of or how do we make it so that you stop having nightmares.
Yeah.
That's a symptom,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
there's not going to be the long-term healing that's going to come with the symptom of that trauma.
And that's a really great point too. And something that I think Zach and I both prioritize and value is that root cause health, right? So treating the root cause, that's something that when I'm looking at other people are coming in from other therapists or other coaches even, and it's like they don't truly understand that principle or they don't use that approach. And that's what leaves people unsatisfied and unhappy. And that's where we don't have those sustainable health and success practices.
I heard this just last night. It was a beautiful analogy. It's like our mentality, especially in the more rigid educations in our field, we're treating fish that are living in poisonous ponds.
Yep. Yep.
And like the root cause is not that there's a problem with this fish, this person. It's there's poison in the water and they're consuming it.
Yeah. And that's a lot of times what I'm talking about too is it's not your fault that these
Right.
things are happening or whatever. It's like we have the power to change them and be aware of them and all of that. But it's like, think about what society is cramming down our throat. Think about the inputs that you're receiving. Like there's a lot that once you're aware, you can make
Right.
those changes. Like you said, just systemically, there's just so many issues that we are faced with every day.
I couldn't ask for a better introduction to where trauma focused hypnotherapy comes from.
Yes.
is that pulse work, is that we're not addressing a deeper issue with clients. We're addressing symptoms, and we're never going to get to a point where there's long-term systemic healing
Mhm.
unless we address that underlying issue. So the trauma focused hypnotherapy is hopefully what a clinician does is take that training and then be able to address the deeper rooted issue
Mhm.
in the unconscious mind in
Yep.
order to make it so that there's that systemic healing.
So can you give us like a 101? Because I think people, again, see a lot of like media or whatever. That's definitely not what's happening in hypnotherapy sessions. So can you kind of just give us like a one-on-one basic primer of what that looks like, what that is, what do you do during the
I always say I do a lot of closed eyes, deep trance work.
okay.
But the most powerful thing that I think that trauma focused hypnotherapy does is give a client the tools to make it so that they break the hypnosis that they've created based on that system. So we walk around every day in trances,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
autopilot's definitely a type of that, but like trauma is a type of that. Like
Yeah.
we're traumatized by something, and what it's going to do is create a trance
Yeah.
about that trauma
Yeah.
that is a part of us that's trying to make up for that ripped away part of us. And
Can you give an
so,
example?
yeah, so I'll even use myself as an example. Like when my son was born, this is going to be great. This is going to be wonderful. I'm going to protect him. I'm going to be the good dad. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be all of these things. Then straight off the bat, that identity was challenged.
Yeah.
It was ripped away of saying, and reality told me that I was not going to be able to protect him from all of the things that I wanted to protect him from. And so then other like parts of me popped up, clinician popped up, and it was okay, well, I do have a lot of medical training and a lot of medical knowledge about this. So instead of playing the nurturing father, oftentimes, especially when he was young, I played clinician. And that clinician inside of me wanted to make up for the fact that I couldn't control everything. And so what trauma focused hypnotherapy would do is go into the unconscious mind and reconstruct this idea of rigid father that needed to protect his son,
Yeah.
and say like, well, we can't protect him all the time.
Yeah.
And there might be a situation where he's not okay. And that doesn't have to have the impact on my identity as it would left on its own devices.
Mhm.
And so in hypnosis, I'm going to be creating metaphors in deep trance, like closed eye, the person's out. I'm going to be creating metaphors for that person in order to make it so that they understand this world is not safe, and that's okay.
Yeah. Being comfortable with the uncomfortable in a term of speaking.
Absolutely.
And so if folks are listening, have listened to our previous episode on EMDR, I really kind of go in depth about how that works. And it sounds like it's a similar approach in that we are looking
Absolutely.
at the unconscious mind. And so the technique is different. So tell me about the technique. How do you get them in that deep trance state?
I don't think that the technique is all that different. I was actually
Okay.
just got into an argument with somebody the other day where they were like, EMDR is not hypnosis. And I was like, well,
They're very similar. Spoiler alert.
yeah, it is. And it didn't click with her because I was just like, hypnosis, I'll move over just a little bit. Hypnosis, like traditionally you have a watch that goes back and forth and there's eye movement and
Same thing.
desensitization.
I movement. Yeah. Yep.
And when I went like this,
Boop,
she
boop,
was
boop.
like, "Oh no!" But I do think that there is differences. The training that I would do in hypnosis is very much more broad. We can't go in the depth that they go into with EMDR. I do think that EMDR is a form of hypnosis, but it's very specific. If hypnosis is all of this, EMDR, it really focuses in on the trauma and the parts of us that get very rigid when we have a traumatic experience,
Mhm.
in kind of like calming and soothing those parts down
Mhm.
in order to make it so that we can function and then address the trauma. And sometimes I get frustrated with EMDR clinicians because they kind of leave it there. But that's an example of a clinician not using the tool for what it's worth.
Because the
Um,
tool, what I love to use it for too, there's so many applications. And that's where, again, if you're a clinician listening to this, please do deep study and continue to study beyond your initial
Absolutely.
training, because at this point, what I've done with the EMDR tool is rework that into how do we use this for performance enhancement for my coaching folks. And right, so it's
That's
like
the
you
point.
can use this as a tool in many different ways. So you have to really continue, please continue to do that deep study and that deep work.
I can't reiterate that. And the same thing happens with hypnosis, is that it's the way to get to those parts.
Yes.
And instead of just saying like, hey, here's the thing, I'll desensitize you for this trauma reaction. You do that, it's going to pop up in a different area of life. And because you haven't addressed anything on a deeper level. The difference on the hypnosis side, I think, is I use it a lot more for daily stuff,
Okay.
because we get into these trances about what we need to do to fix our trauma, or to be a good kid, or to do for that part of us that was traumatized what wasn't done for it at that time. Like, what did I need when I'm sitting here looking at what looks like my lifeless son? Like, what did that part of me at that time need?
And
And
I
my
will
initial
say, I do work that in with my EMDR people too. So again, I think it's, as a clinician, you have to be well versed in many different things to pull them all in. It's an eclectic
absolutely.
situation here.
Absolutely. And that's why Milton Erickson, who was the guy that was the American hypnosis person who trained my teacher, he would always say, don't just recreate and redo my techniques. He's like, make them your own.
Yeah.
And he would even say to people, if you do exactly what I do, you're doing it wrong.
I love that.
And so my goal would be to give a client the opportunity to go to that deep place and actually give that part of them what it needed at that time. So when I try to do things like, I'm going to be the best clinician that I can possibly be so that I can make up for the fact that I felt at that time like I wasn't a good enough clinician. I'm going to be the most successful person because I did not like that feeling of not being successful way back when. And I think that those are the trances that we carry with us that need to be broken apart and then reintegrated into who we are. And that's at least my foundation for hypnosis.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I think as we're also looking at the context of applying this to business owners, to leaders, what you said just right there about the success. I mean, I'm thinking about that word striver. The striver part in internal family systems comes up a lot with people. Us, right? Yeah. Us people who want to have that feeling of being successful because maybe we weren't before, or have something to prove, or we weren't given that acknowledgement or encouragement or development that we needed when we were younger. And so here's us going after that really hard right now. To folks who are listening, please get the support, whatever that looks like for you, whether you prefer the modality of hypnosis, whether you prefer the modality of EMDR. If you don't know what to ask for or what to look for, always reach out to us or get informed, because there is a solution for you. And again, I love how you said it. We're just like in this trance. We're just like kind of doing this day after day. But both, no matter what you choose, find something that's going to impact your unconscious mind, like the things that are driving the patterns, your behaviors, your thoughts, your beliefs every day.
Yeah. And just to bounce off of that, like, in my opinion, that's the foundation of burnout, is when it's like, I want to be that striver. I'm going to strive to do this thing. And then like that doesn't ever work, because
Yeah.
you can't recreate the system that was created back then and actually do for yourself unless you go back to that place and do that work.
And that's why when people reach that level of success, you hear them say, I don't really feel anything. Or they reach some sort of milestone that they think is going to change everything, or a dollar amount
It
or whatever.
doesn't.
That's not the thing. The thing is the deep internal work that Zach and I do. So yes, thank you so much for this. We're going to have to wrap it up today for time, but thank you for being on the show, and please tell people how they can work with you or connect with you, or how best you want them to reach out if so.
For trauma focused hypnotherapy, the traumafocusedhypnotherapy.com, the course that we just had published, the online course. So for the first time, you can be a certified clinical hypnotherapist in an online course.
Yeah.
And then .com, put an inquiry in there. My email is zach@zacharydodson.com. I think I put that in there. But
Send it over. We'll put it in the show notes. Everything will be there for you all. And again, thanks so much for being here, Zach. This was a fabulous conversation. I can't wait to share it with everyone. And we
Thank
will
you.
catch you all in the next episode.
If you're enjoying the Bigger Braver Life show, make sure to subscribe and leave a review so this show gets to more leaders like you. I also invite you to join the weekly newsletter fusing brain science, intuitive-based tools, tips, and strategies for you to elevate your potential, expand your impact, and enjoy your life.
Get started at angelamarie.co.